Jamil Jaffer and Nick Ackerman for their legal perspectives on this. Jamil is a former counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for National Security and former Associate Counsel to President George W. Bush. Nick is a former Assistant Special Watergate Prosecutor and former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Good to see both of you. Jamil, first, what's your reaction to Lauro's argument?
Well, look, I don't think Lauro is right. I mean, the president can certainly say a lot of things publicly and engage in his right of free speech. What he can't do is ask somebody to engage in conduct that is illegal. The asking, just because that is speech, doesn't mean it's covered by the First Amendment in that context. And so in this case, the president did all sorts of things, all sorts of overt acts, or at least he's alleged to have in the indictment that, if proven, certainly could subject him to criminal liability, notwithstanding the First Amendment.
And Nick, debating free speech on television is one thing, but how would this argument hold up in court?
It would fall flat. This argument is total nonsense. Every fraud that's ever charged always has speech connected with it. There's always the question of whether the person lied and whether that lie was in furtherance of something that that person was trying to steal. Every case where I was a prosecutor, where it was a fraud case, I would tell the jury, this case is about lying and stealing. Here, it was lying about the election, lying about a rigged election, and then trying to steal the election from Joe Biden. Simple as that.
And Jamil, last hour I spoke with former Nixon White House counsel John Dean, who said that Nixon and Trump were similar in the way that they would pose their commands as questions. And as it pertained to Watergate, Nixon's ask was not aspirational. Do you see Trump's ask in a similar way? He even went as far as to saying, mob bosses talk this way.
Well, certainly his lawyers are going to frame it that way in court, and we'll see how that argument fares. As you know, obviously, the president is innocent until proven guilty in our system by a reasonable doubt before a jury of his peers. That being said, if the government proves the facts that they've laid out in the indictment, they have a strong case to argue that, in fact, the former president did, in fact, seek to defraud the United States, did seek to obstruct a government purpose, a government proceeding. And so that's the real challenge his lawyers are going to face, regardless of all his arguments about First Amendment and about phrasing his orders as questions. That doesn't really change the fact of what he was asking people to do and what he sought to have done and the end purpose of his efforts.
So then, Jamil, is this really about trying to taint perhaps a prospective jury pool, knowing that this kind of argument is not going to fly in court, but maybe in the court of public opinion?
Well, I'm not sure about tainting a jury pool, but certainly trying to set the public perception of the case and try to sort of engage in the narrative that the president has engaged in from the beginning, which is that A, this election was stolen from him, B, that he's being pursued by the deep state, and that this is a conspiracy designed to undermine his ability to be a candidate and represent the average person. Now, of course, if you're the average person, you've got to be asking yourself, how is this billionaire who doesn't have anything in common with me representing me out there in public?
All right, Nick, and Trump's lawyers, they do have until tomorrow afternoon to respond to the Justice Department's proposal for a protective order. The Trump team tried to get an extension. Judge denied that request. Is this just part of the Trump team strategy to delay?
No question. If you look at this, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, this was the wrong issue to try and delay on. First of all, the issue here was whether or not they would agree to the order, the protective order, the exact same protective order that was filed in Miami court, the same one they agreed to down there, whether or not they would agree to that before they got discovery. So what they're trying to do is delay that because Jack Smith is ready, as he said in his papers, to push the button and to provide them with all the discovery immediately. Secondly, they came up with these absolutely crazy ideas that they have to file papers, that they have to have oral argument, that the judge may have more questions. The judge shot back pretty quickly, and this was all over the weekend. This was last night that she came down with this opinion and basically said, this is ridiculous in a sense. You've got to stick to what my order was. You've got to respond by 5 o'clock Monday. And if you want, you can take their order and you can mark it up. And that's what I asked you to do. And I'm not countenancing any other delays on this. So I think this is a extremely bad omen for the Trump defense team, because it's obvious that this judge is not going to take any nonsense and is going to push this case ahead. And I predict there's going to be a trial date set in January or February of next year.
And the judge, as a result of her decision this weekend, denying that extension, now the Trump team says that they think that she should recuse herself, and they claim to have other reasons why. So, Jamil, this morning, the former vice president, he left open the possibility that he would testify if necessary. Take a listen.
I have no plans to testify, but look, we'll always comply with the law. But look, I want to tell you, I don't know what the path of this indictment will be. The president's entitled to a presumption of innocence. He's entitled to make his defense in court. There actually are profound issues around this pertaining to the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and the rest. I'm confident he and his lawyers will litigate all of those things.
So, Jamil, how might Pence's testimony undermine Trump's claims that he was not asking, not demanding, but instead, just really giving him no options than to try to not certify the election?
Well, Frederica, certainly if the vice president were to testify against the former president, his former boss, and talk about the pressure that he felt under by the former president, by the team around him to certify or to decertify the votes and to send them back to the states, that certainly could be damning for the former president. At the same time, Vice President Pence lays out some very important issues, which is that the president does get a presumption of innocence, that the government does have to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, and there are these very tough legal issues. And so while I agree with Nick that the judge is likely to set a trial date soon, it is very possible that we could see attempts by the Trump team to appeal, to seek interlocutory appeal. They're disfavored in criminal cases, and yet they may seek to get appeals moving up to try and slow this thing down and try to delay it past the election, which is the goal, I think, of the campaign, because they believe the president gets more political benefits and may be able to stop the prosecution or pardon himself if he's in fact elected.
And Nick, do you see anything standing in the way of a Pence testimony?
None whatsoever. He's going to be subpoenaed to testify. He's going to have no choice but to testify. And his testimony is probably the most significant of anybody in the trial, because everything comes back to what Mike Pence would do. That's why Donald Trump set up these phony electors, so that he could either reject the Biden electors from the battleground states or send it back to the states and delay it even more to try and get the state legislatures to appoint the Trump electors in the place of the Biden electors. This was nothing more than a simple criminal scheme. I must say, I disagree that there are significant issues here. This case has been designed in a way that is streamlined to avoid First Amendment issues. For example, unlike with the impeachment proceeding, there is no issue about Donald Trump telling the crowd at the Ellipse to go up to the Capitol and do whatever they were going to do. They've eliminated that from this. They've eliminated all the First Amendment issues. The motions on this particular prosecution are really going to be very straightforward, almost perfunctory, and will be perfunctorily denied. So the idea that Donald Trump has real issues here, I think, is really nonsense.
Conspiracy to defraud the U.S., conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction and attempt to obstruct official proceeding, and conspiracy against voting rights. All right, that's what's at issue. Jamil Jaffer, Nick Ackerman, thanks to you both.
Thanks, Rita.
Thank you.
All right, still ahead.